Буду регу. Буду регу. Бой. Нет. Нет, не надо. Вот это да. Очень интересно.
Наоборот.
Потом музыку играть.
En classique. Ouais. Alors, j'espère que vous n'allez pas voir mes mails là. Parce que tu sais, des fois, il y a des trucs qui s'affichent, il faut que je fasse gaffe. Que après, les gens, ils vont voir mes commandes sur... mes commandes sur... j'allais dire des trucs, des blagues obscènes. Mes commandes de pompe à bite. Votre pompe à bite a bien été commandée. Alors attends, c'était Brigitte je crois. Tac tac tac. Elle m'a dit quoi Hugo? Je vais répondre à une question par mail d'une abonnée. Voilà, c'est ça. Bon, alors.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh and welcome to Josh Wright Piano TV. Today I wanted to present a quick tip about the Schubert Impromptu in G flat major, opus 90 number 3, perhaps his most famous impromptu. And this tip came from a recent lesson that I was teaching to one of my longtime students, Dana. And she had worked so hard on her voicing in the previous weeks, so she was projecting really nicely now. And bringing out that melody nicely. But what was happening a bit is she was quite uneven and getting some having evenness issues both with sound and with tempo. So it's completely fine to use rubato in here. This doesn't have to be metronomic by any means, but I wanted to share a procedure that I gave her to hopefully remedy this situation. What was happening is as she was holding these notes, which Schubert instructs, the rest of her hand was getting a bit tight, and it was causing those evenness issues, some random accenting and also some clumping. So there's a small two-step process to help fix this. I'm not saying this is a magic elixir that's going to fix all of your problems, but this seemed to really help her in the lesson, so I wanted to share it here in a video. What we went over is rather than holding this as a practice method, let's first start with getting rid of the melody altogether and feeling the natural motion of the hand when it's completely free of having to play any of those melody notes. And that is a great first step because it kind of reacquaints you with a relaxed hand. When you have to hold something in the other part of the hand, subconsciously you can start tightening things that you wouldn't normally tighten. The next thing that I had her do, and this is a great exercise just to get better at voicing and shaping anyway, is to not hold your melody notes because it's so much easier to shape something when things are connected. You can really feel that weight transfer and then less. Even though those aren't perfectly connected because they're all fives, I'm really holding those. Let's take that out of the equation and play all of this, but don't hold those. This is just a practice method, but it's going to teach you how to keep the hand loose while still listening very carefully for good shaping there and then coming down. Okay, so I'm going to be letting go of that. And more to there, and then less. And this is going to keep the hand very loose. Once you've mastered those two, so the bottoms by themselves, and then not holding the top, you should have built, and this is not something you do in 5 minutes, this is something you do over the course of several days or weeks. Once you get that feeling and you're able to relax in both of those steps, then you can start holding on to the melody again. And purists will say you've got to connect them absolutely perfectly, but because we have the pedal down, if you want to hold it for most of the time and then lift at the end so that you can retake it very deliberately, that would be probably helpful for your hand to not tighten up too much. Additionally, I want to give you a little image. If you have a wooden board and you drive a nail down into that board, you can still spin that board 360 degrees. If you put 2 nails in the board, it's not moving. You might get a little wiggle out of it, maybe. Once you have 3 and 4 and 5 nails in that board, it's definitely not moving. And the same could be said about the hand. The hand is a lot more flexible than a nail on a board, obviously. But the more fingers I have down at one time, the more locked my hand is. So even as we go back to holding that, the bottom of this figure, the bottom line of that figure, still has a bit of flexibility. It's not as flexible as our step 2 where we let go of those melody notes, but you're still feeling the remnants of that practice with that flexibility, and you can really minimize that down to be very unnoticeable to the audience. If you watch my hand, you're not thinking, wow, he's rotating a lot, but I feel these little internal movements in my hand so that I can connect that melody, but still voice effectively. So that is a little method that worked really well for one of my students, and I wanted to share it here on the channel. If any of you have any questions, my email is josh@joshwrightpiano.com. Just a disclaimer, I'm not able to answer every email I receive. I just receive way too many to be able to keep up with that and my private teaching and making these videos and my online courses. But if you need a quick clarification, I can usually answer those. So I will leave a few links in the description below. One of them is for a free webinar containing 10 of my favorite tips to help take your playing to a higher level. These are tips that I use every day in my teaching and in my own practice. Second, I will leave a few links to my paid courses, and last of all, I will leave a link to my gear kit with everything that I use to film these videos, as well as some other helpful gear like theory books, other books that I find helpful, CDs that I like, how to effectively do a Skype lesson. A lot of different things are in that kit, so I hope you enjoy that as well. Have a great week. Good luck in your practice sessions.
Pagina. Gruppo da pagina. Нет, не могу. Марк. потом самый быстрый, по-моему, пианист всех.
Learning guitar? Wait, don't touch that skip button. This is going to change everything.
Нет, наоборот, так нет, наоборот, как-то это думает. Он наоборот, это дурака идешь. Так это есть она сама, что за капец? Ну наоборот. Нет, наоборот, нет. Типа наоборот. Нет, наоборот. Наоборот. Ну ладно. Ну нет, наоборот. Что такое? Кстати, вот эту штучку ты вернешься назад, или там уже сейчас не будет этой, где эти пупсы-то? Что случилось? Советик, публик советик. Социалисты, советик, да,
In this video, we're going to start exploring conflict between creatures. To try to build some understanding here, we're going to use some simulations and some ideas from a field of math called game theory. Okay, so in our simulation, food will appear each day, and then blobs will appear and go out to eat the food.
алмазов, поносов у вас нету? Ух ты, смотри-ка есть. 97, вот явно то, что надо. Такого не бывает. Смотри, даже так это самое. Роман там. Ой, мама. Там что здесь? Ну вот это уже не надо было. Разнообразие. Ладно, не так и все. О, Джо Байден. А ты что там делаешь, Джо Байден? Как он туда? Ты как попал? Как он туда попал? Надо спросить, он тебя уже. Ладно, ладно. Ладушек, да. не знаю, просто нет, я просто сам. Небо нет.
We use the same survival and reproduction rules as in previous videos. Eating one piece of food lets a creature survive to the next day, and eating two pieces of food allows a creature to both survive and reproduce. What's different in this simulation, though, is that food will come in pairs. Each creature randomly picks a pair of food to walk to, so it might get the pair all to itself and get to go home with two food and then reproduce, or another creature might find the pair at the same time. And when this happens, they have to somehow figure out how to split things up. We'll start out by having only one possible strategy for creatures who run into each other. They'll just share, each taking a piece of food and going home to survive to the next day. And because this strategy is so nice, we'll give it the name Dove, time. And when each creature randomly picks a pair of food to walk to, so it might get the pair all to itself and get to go home with two food and then reproduce, or another creature might find the pair at the same time. And when this happens, they have to somehow figure out how to split things up. We'll start out by having only one possible strategy for creatures who run into each other. They'll just share, each taking a piece of food and going home to survive to the next day. And
Нет, ты же ходишь и сидишь. А, ну да. Да, это я, да. Нельзя, блин, как это. Ну, не знаю. Он точно ВКонтакте сидит. Ну и что, да? Ну, тебе так вот говорят, что нет. Ну нет, наоборот, нет. Вот это есть. А, ну да. Нет, нет, свое. О, у меня тоже мерч есть. Не надо, не надо. Наоборот. Как-то вот, да. Нет, ну да. Наверное, нет, просто так. Нет, это уж совсем там могли бы. А, ну нет, ну да. Да нет, самый день. Ну, ух ты, ничего себе. Ваня Иванов, что ли? нам тебя ходит. Нет, у тебя не так будет. Ну нет, нет. Ну что ты злой. На себя-то посмотри, говорит, так нет. Да нет, там себе нет. Да нет, больной, говорит, ты просто нет, да, ну типа да. Нет, это никто не видит. Ты тоже музыкант, что ли? Брат твой, что ли? Старший. О, ну это как бы культ личности. Здоровье такое. Ой, это вообще, да. Тебе так говорит, да. В румынских сетях еще. Румыния тоже. Румын долго. Шош. Серьезно? Самый какой список? Типа того. Точно видно. С Киева, да, видно? Хуже не будет, но может быть. Ну будет, но бывает, да. Может, добавим? Фортепиано, я уже говорю. Ну нет, на дорогу. Не знаю. Я чуть нет, я ничего. Не чешется, нет, не чешется. Женька Тимакин. И Женька Тимакин говорит, что ты несешь? Он так говорит. Ну нет, это точно не ВКонтакте. Да. Ладно, что сейчас. Это они там как. Ой, это не надо. Слишком. Видно горецо. Антисемит, что ли? А наоборот, семит. Наоборот, семит. Ладно. Ну, нет, как это так будет? Нет, а вот ты имел в виду, да, что, серьезно? Нет. Да нет, ты что? Так, нет, я не знаю, мне кажется. Так нет. Нет, я не добавлял. Ты что, смеешься?
And because this strategy is so nice, we'll give it the name Dove. All right, let's let things run for a bit. Alright, now let's add a new strategy called the hawk strategy. Hawks are more aggressive. If a hawk meets a dove, the hawk will go for the same piece of food as the dove, eat half of it, and then quickly eat the other piece of food, taking it for itself. This half food does complicate our survival and reproduction rules a little bit. So in this situation, a dove ends the day with half of food, so it'll have a 50% chance of surviving to the next day. And the hawk ends its day with 1.5 food, so it'll survive for sure and also have a 50% chance of reproducing. So it looks good to be a hawk, but it's also risky. If two hawks meet, they'll fight, and fighting is taxing. At the very least, they use a lot of energy and they might also get injured. So when hawks fight, each one gets a piece of food, but they spend so much energy fighting that they use up all the benefit of the food right away and effectively go home with 0 food, meaning they won't survive. So now let's try adding a hawk creature to our simulation and see what happens. Now is a good time to pause and predict what you think will happen.
Круто. Не надо доедать больше, да? Надо доедать. Ты как интересно. Ну, как бы, да, я кстати пацан, я просто... Ладно, все. В чем вообще?
Alright, it looks like we have a mixture that fluctuates roughly around half and half. And there are also fewer creatures overall, even with the same amount of food. Here's an example of how natural selection doesn't necessarily act for the good of the species. And to cover our bases, let's try starting with all hawks. Okay, not too surprisingly, they're tearing each other apart, and their max population size didn't even reach half of the population size of the doves. Now, if we add a dove to the mix in the next day, What do you think will happen? Okay, so it took the doves a little while to gain a foothold here, but eventually we end up in a similar situation with a fluctuating mixture of hawks and doves. So why do we care? Well, this is a situation where survival of the fittest
Так, иду.
Ну, вот это имеется в виду, да. Опять что ли сейчас
Donc, réponse.
Опять что ли? Слабак просто причина, да. Ну, слабак. А, ну да, вот это не. Шутку дальше. Чем просто? Ух ты, это что такое? Там эта штучка такая. Ладно, хватит уже. Мне непонятно. Я краю, вот идет сюда. Думай страшненько. Они еще не закрыли до сих пор эти библиотеки. Откуда они столько где-то? Ладно. Вот это я. Спасибо. Не помню. Библиофил вообще. Я. Ауч. Ауч. Я злой на них. Я не знаю. Знаю это не тебя, просто я. Нет, что ты злой просто и все. Я злой, что ли? Я злой? Ты что? А, я же забыл это вообще. Супер мило, понятно. Точно все будет нормально. Ой, это здесь вообще причем. Даже я на своей стене должен писать сегодня. Ну, не отвечает. Ну, нет, ну надо, это есть то самое. But skateboard. Wasting. Мне тоже просто... Ой, мама. Нет, больно надо, я ничего не... Я не понимаю, ну лучше скажите. Лучше про это не знаю. Наоборот, ну вот она... другие. Нет, не надо уже хватит. А что мне нравится? Прикольно же это. Ну как бы да, не так, что... Ну а что тебе не нравится эта игра?
Doesn't help us understand what's going on. There isn't one fittest strategy. We can get a better sense for why this is by translating our conflict rules from before into a table. If two doves face each other, they'll each get one food. If a dove faces a hawk, the dove gets half a food and the hawk gets 1.5 or 3/2 food. And if we reverse perspectives, if a hawk faces a dove, they'll get 3/2 and 1/2. And when a hawk faces another hawk, they'll each end up with 0 after they waste all that energy fighting each other. Now that we have this table, let's imagine blobs that can choose which strategy they want to play. Say, I control the blob on top and you control the blob on the left. Say you know that I'm going to play a hawk strategy, which of course I am. What should you?
Насчет опыта. Вот нет, наоборот. Вот труп 7, ну да, сейчас труп 7. Да, вот надо. Вот это он может, да. Хрень 18. Или 18. Нет. 17. Да, конкурс. Ордизм. Ну да. Что, новое там есть? Мать пора. Активнее. Виды чего, да, людей. А он, ну нет, это себе виды. Это ты уже говорил.
You make me sing, you make me feel good, everything. You bring me up when I've been down. This only happens when you are around. And I can't go on this way with it stronger every day, but being too shy to say I really love you. I love you. I do.
Эй. Что ты хотел сказать? Всем. Фортепиано. Нет, ну вот это, да, да. Ну, понятно, там хоть то же самое все. Серьезно? Нет, не надо, ну это не наоборот. Что так что? Ну нет, нет, спасибо. Ладно.
You do.
Мать надо.
Well, you're better off just backing down and taking your half food. That might be annoying since it feels like I'm winning somehow, and you might be tempted to challenge me and also play hawk to teach me that I can't just push you around.
Спокойно, опять очень спокойно, да. Я Нет, она тебе так не видит. Ну да. Милая просто, милая. Милая просто, милая, милая.
This attempted to challenge me and also... Well, you're better off just backing down and taking your half food. That might be annoying since it feels like I'm winning somehow, and you might be tempted to challenge me and also play hawk to teach me that I can't just push you around. This could make sense if we were going to play this game against each other over and over again, as two humans might do, and that is something we'll talk about in future videos. But in this situation, we're just these simple blobs with no social structure, interacting once, and even if we do see each other again, we won't remember it. So all that matters is how much food we take home right now. And if you want to maximize your chances of surviving and reproducing, you'll play dove. Discretion is the better part of valor here. Let's record this by drawing an arrow. If we're in the right-hand column because I'm playing hawk, the situation in the upper right square is the best you can do. Okay, in the other case where I'm not so mean, you know that I'm going to play the dove strategy. In this case, you'll do better playing hawk. And here again, because you're a very smart human, you might be tempted to think about the future and want to reward me for playing nice and play dove yourself, but we're just these really simple blob creatures who might never see each other again. So if you want to maximize your chance of reproducing, you'll play hawk. And we can record this with another arrow. So now to complete this table, we can reverse perspectives and think about what I should do in response to you, which I won't go through in detail, it's the same reasoning, but we'd get similar arrows in the rows here. These arrows all point to more advantageous strategies. And the interesting thing to notice is that there are two stable situations. Either you play hawk and I play dove, or you play dove and I play hawk. If we're in one of those two situations, either one of us would be worse off if we pick a different strategy. And by the way, this way of analyzing choices is called game theory, which is a whole field of math. And a situation where nobody benefits from changing their strategy is called a Nash equilibrium, named after John Nash, who some would say had a beautiful mind. So the best strategy isn't hawk or dove. It's to do the opposite of what your opponent is doing. When there are a lot of doves, it's better to be a hawk, and when there are a lot of hawks, it's better to be a dove. There's some equilibrium fraction of doves that the population has always pulled toward. Great, so we have the main conceptual point down, but we can deepen our understanding by calculating what that equilibrium fraction should be. The population will be in equilibrium if doves and hawks have the same expected average score in a contest, right? Equilibrium is when, on average, we don't expect to change one way or the other, so we can't have one strategy doing better. They're equal. Our goal is to find the fraction of doves that makes this condition true. On our way there, let's first calculate the expected average score for a dove in a hypothetical example, say where the rest of the population is 90% doves. So let's see, a dove will have a 90% chance of facing another dove, in which case it gets the dove versus dove payoff of one food. And a dove also has a 10% chance of facing a hawk, right? That's just the rest of the creatures, in which case it only gets a half a food. So overall, when a dove runs into another creature when the rest of the population is 90% doves, it'll come away with 0.95 food on average. This number is pretty meaningless on its own, but once we calculate the expected hawk score, we can compare the two to see whether the equilibrium condition is met. So let's do that. Let's find the expected hawk score. It could be good to pause and try to do this yourself to make sure it all makes sense. Maybe even rewinding to watch the dove part again. Okay, just like before, the rest of the population is 90% doves, and against a dove, a hawk gets 1.5 or 3/2 pieces of food. And again, there's a 10% chance of running into another hawk, in which case our hawk goes home with 0 food. And this comes out to 1.35 food on average. Now, notice that 1.35 is more than 0.95, so at 90% doves, hawks will do better, and we'd expect the fraction of hawks to increase in the next generation. So it's not equilibrium, not 90%. Now to find out what fraction of doves does meet the equilibrium condition, we can write the fractions of doves and hawks as variables instead of just guessing at specific numbers. And you might be saying right now, wow, that's a lot of letters, which is a fair point, but we're almost there, and our next step is actually to get rid of one of those letters, so there's a nice treat already. Doves and hawks make up all the creatures, so their fractions have to add up to 1. And this means we can replace the small h with 1 minus small d. And now the expected dove and hawk scores are both written as functions of one variable, and the same variable, so we can graph them on top of each other. The expected scores are equal when the graphed lines cross, and indeed the equilibrium condition is met at 50% doves. And if we run a simulation with way more creatures than before, unfortunately too many to animate, the randomness smooths out a bit and we can see that the prediction is true. Okay, so it might feel like that was kind of a lot of work just to verify what we already thought, but the fraction of doves isn't always going to be 1/2. It depends on the numbers in our payoff grid. The most interesting number to play with here is the hawk versus hawk payoff. So far we've been saying that the hawks each get 1 piece of food but waste all the energy of the food on fighting. But what if instead they only waste most of the energy, not all of it, and go home with a score of 1/4? Plugging that in, we see the population move toward 1/3 doves. And again, we can see this borne out in the simulation. At this point, congratulations, we have a pretty detailed understanding of how populations of hawks and doves work. And as basic as this model is, with only 2 simple strategies, it's a powerful starting point for analyzing behavior in the real world. And before we go, I want to give you some teasers for how we'll build on this to get closer to reality in future videos. First, creatures in the real world can play more than one strategy. So instead of having their behavior completely determined by a single gene, our creatures could have several genes affecting their behavior, causing them to have different chances of playing hawk or dove. And the game theory term for this is mixed strategies. There can also be more complex conditional strategies that act differently depending who they're facing. For example, there could be a strategy that fights with hawks but is nice to doves. And there could also be a strategy that tries to threaten a fight but runs away if things get serious. And seeing what happens with these kinds of strategies can help us understand why some animals put on threatening displays while rarely actually fighting, or have somewhat ritualistic fights that usually don't harm anyone. Next, most conflicts are actually asymmetric. So far, we've been assuming that everyone has the same amount to gain and lose, and that all